Clancy, aye. Sir, welcome.
My name is Clancy Immislin, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm very glad to be here for this auspicious occasion of this anniversary of the group, although it, for us from the outside, it isn't quite as approached the coronation level that it does amongst the founders, but we do admire them very much, and we think they've done a wonderful job. They do operate with enthusiasm. Incidentally, it's kind of interesting. Some of you probably don't know this. The word enthusiasm, the root of it, I looked it up one time in the dictionary, is from the Greek root en, meaning within, theos, God. It means the expression of the God within, enthusiasm. It has certainly come over the years to mean something a little bit different than that, but that really is a good working definition. And we have a lot of things that we get together for in these AA meetings. I was listening to the guys speak from around the visitors. A guy from Scranton, I spoke at Scranton a few years ago. They took me down a mine, left me there. I guess I'd offended some of them. I talked about the steps. But you may wonder if you're kind of new. I was going to talk to this new fellow from out of town here, but after he introduced himself twice, he got up and left. Well, just probably has time for a token appearance at each meeting. Well, we old-timers notice those things. But like most of you in this room, I suppose, I am happy to be sober. Some of us aren't happy to be sober. I've just come in town. I was down in Jekyll Island, Georgia over the weekend, and I came up on a plane Sunday afternoon, and Bill and his agents picked me up, and I just about froze when that wind hit me. But I've had a whirlwind time. I've gone to a meeting, and I've gone to the movies, and I've had lunch in the World Service Office with our beloved Miss Susan. I've went to a play, went on a train trip, done all sorts of things. Come to this meeting, and tomorrow morning I'll get up very early, and I'll be at the airport at 7 and catch a plane home, and tomorrow noon I'll be at work, and no one will know what a sacrifice it's been. I'll just say, "Where have you been, for Christ's sake?" Well, I didn't mean to profane. But I'm glad this meeting is operating so well, because in my opinion, what you really need to make a meeting successful, we'd like to, say, announce speakers and have famous speakers and do this and that, but it's been my experience in meetings like this, and there are a number of meetings like this around the country and around the world that have been started on this premise, and all you have to do is make sure that you start on time, that you have a good ethic for your secretary, that you have coffee ready, and you have a decent speaker. And it takes a long time. It builds up and builds up. We have a meeting like this in Tacoma, Washington, called the North Pacific Group, and faced a lot of problems when they started. Everybody said, they're a bunch of Nazis. To hell with those Nazis. And now it's the largest and most successful speaker group in the area. In Minneapolis, there's a Central Pacific Group started by some people who moved there from our group, and terrible reactions. They wouldn't even put their meetings sometimes in the public AA publication at first. They thought they were just a bunch of fascists, and now it's the largest and most successful meeting in Minnesota, North Central America. And there's a meeting called the Southern Pacific Group in Charlotte, North Carolina. Same thing. And then Fort Worth, the Fort Worth Pacific Group, and the Atlantic Group, which is not the Pacific Group, but it's the Atlantic Group. But it's always the same thing. It's a series of alcoholics talking to alcoholics about alcoholism, not talking about my experiences with my hairdresser or what happened to me when I was talking to my psychiatrist today, but rather what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like now. And that's what's made AA grow. So often AA when it gets unstructured, we think we've come here to find freedom, but we really don't here to come. We've had all the freedom we can handle. I had so much freedom, they kept taking away my freedom. Say, that's pretty clever. Let me write that down. I'll use that at a big meeting sometime. Thought I told you to ring the bells, Quasimodo. Anyway. But AA is such a deceptively simple thing, and many people die after coming here. The worst years of my life came after I was sent to AA, after I came here, and good people tried to help me. And again in different cities and different places I went to AA because I'd be desperate and frantic and the heat would be on, and I'd sit in AA a while and I'd know, this isn't for me. These people aren't like me. They're nice people. They're good people, but they're not like me. There's something different about me. And I had no idea. This is the universal cry of everybody like me, and I presume like you if you're here. This feeling down deep, yes, I know they mean well, but they don't understand. My case truly is different. And I spent thousands and thousands of dollars in psychoanalysis because I thought that would probably help me get to the root of my problems. And I found all sorts of breakthroughs. I found out that I'd been repressed as a child by the Norwegian Lutheran Church. I hadn't known that. That really broke my heart. At one time I was thinking of starting a group called Adult Children of Norwegian Lutherans. And we could hire a couple of codependents and sit around and be pissed off every week. I discovered a lot of things about running away to the sea early when I was 15 years old. When most kids in high school, I lied my age, and I hitchhiked to San Francisco and lied my age. I was on a ship going to the South Pacific early in the Second World War, surrounded by really tough guys and a brutal life on merchant ships early in the Second World War. In fact, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want to say this, but it may help you understand why I'm sensitive a little bit. You hardly pick up the paper today without reading some new child molestation case. Somebody's molesting children or hurting children or sexually assaulting them. It's just frightening. And I think of the fact that I hitchhiked from Wisconsin all the way to San Francisco and then got in a ship with some of the worst guys that ever lived and sailed with them and came back, got in another ship with a bunch of worst guys that ever lived, and later I went in the Navy, and nobody ever sexually molested me once. It makes you feel undesirable. But on that first ship, up to that time, I felt ill at ease, like most kids do, I suppose. But on that ship, some guys got me to drink some whiskey. And I drank some whiskey, and I vomited up, and they laughed at me, so I tried again when nobody was looking, and this went on for a while. I gave you a little juice while you were gone. I hate to see newcomers who look better than I do. Well, maybe they're getting better AA here than we. But on that ship, I finally held a drink of whiskey down, and I realized that on that ship there was a way to make myself feel the way men looked. And many years later, I took my last drink on a street corner in Los Angeles. I was in some dirty, wet clothes. I had lost my clothing somewhere. I had just been thrown out of a Skid Row mission. And the guy said, "And stay out of here, you damn bum." I tried to explain to him, I'm not a bum. 3 years ago, I was on the faculty of the University of Texas. Ads that I helped write, the El City Elmer ads for the Borden Company, were running that very week in Life and Time and Starting Post. I've had my picture in the New York Times for one of my achievements. How many people do you know have had their picture in the New York Times for one of their achievements? But it's hard to explain these things in midair. And I stood outside of that mission, and I had a terrible feeling. I probably couldn't identify, but in trying to reconstitute that moment, I suppose the feeling that made me feel so bad is a feeling that comes to people like me. I look around, and there is no friendly direction, which is worse than physical pain or mental pain, just no friendly direction. You've burned them all off. Now, I'm sure there were people who maybe would want to see me, but I didn't know who they were. My wife and children were gone. My mother, I was an only child. My mother was not allowed to accept phone calls from me anymore because my stepfather was so tired of watching me tell her stories to get her to send me some money and then break her heart once more. He would rather have her think I was dead than the way I was. And I stood in that street corner, and some guy would come up to me and said, "You know, Slim, you're dying. Now, you've been in and out of AA for 10 years. Why don't you just go back to AA and admit you're an alcoholic and do something about it?" And if someone had said that to me, and if I were in a mood to be honest, which I may or may not have been, because when you're desperate, honesty ranks pretty low on the list of priorities. Is how do I get out of this, or how do I get them to leave me alone? But if I were in a mood to be honest, I'd have to tell them, I'm not an alcoholic, pal. I wish I were, but I'm not an alcoholic. I know there's something wrong with me. I know there's something wrong with me since I was a little boy. And I've been disguising it in various ways, in various pretendings of being hip, slick, and cool, and intelligent, and all sorts of things. But I'm not really an alcoholic. And if you'd said, well, prove you're not an alcoholic, I would not have been able to do that, because I wouldn't have been able to stand back and evaluate myself and examine why I wasn't an alcoholic. So I probably would have done what people like me do when they get frightened. People who are frightened, people like me, and who get cornered. And they say things like, get out of my face! Screw you! Leave me alone! Because that's how I protect myself. But I now know why I knew I wasn't an alcoholic. I learned it some years later, learned it watching people coming into AA and seeing myself. And it's really a very simple reason. I'm not one of those who thinks AA is imbued with a great deal of secret mysticism that is only vouchsafed to a few. I think that kills a lot of people when you get that impression. It is a very pragmatic thing I've come to discover long after I've been sober. But the reason I knew I was an alcoholic was because I'd been to a lot of AA meetings in a lot of cities where I'd worked when the heat was on, and I learned what an alcoholic was. I learned nothing else. And that kind of begs the question, well, what's an alcoholic? Well, we all know what an alcoholic is. People driving out back and forth on Fifth Avenue out here, Lex, they know what an alcoholic is. There seem to be people in every generation who seem to can't handle their drinking, and their lives get screwed up, their emotions get painful, they get driven to some place like AA, and the AA sober them up and they clean up their act, and then they feel better. Isn't that a reasonable description of alcoholics? I mean, I went to a lot of meetings over those years, and you do the same thing in New York or San Francisco or Dallas or anywhere else. But it boils down to this. The stories are different, but the thrust is this. I used to drink, and it's really painful. I came to AA, and they sobered me up. I cleaned up my act, and now I'm feeling better. And I could always pass for an alcoholic, because I drank like an alcoholic much of the time. I got in trouble, got to jails and hospitals. I lost a lot of things. I look back, and it's kind of funny. I sold out my integrity piece by piece over the years to get out of jams or problems. It would seem just ironic that the last tattered piece of integrity I should hang on to would be that one, that I wasn't really an alcoholic. But I really believed I wasn't, because of one thing that I could not overcome. And it turns out, in the years since then, I've watched many, many people die and almost die because they can't overcome it. And it's just quite simple. I drink like an alcoholic. I get in trouble like an alcoholic. I have problems like an alcoholic. But unlike alcoholics, it is when I get sober and clean up my act, that's when my life gets painful. And that's when my emotions get out of whack. And I try so hard to be good. I want to be good for my little children. I want to hold this job I've worked a long time to get. I want to have my parents to be somewhat proud of me. I'd like to live with some degree of respect from my peers because I've got ability, and I don't want to always be patronized by people I wouldn't hire to mow my lawn half the time. And they patronize me as though I'm some kind of an object of humor. But the longer I stay sober, the worse it gets. It's almost as though they put a big spring inside of me, and they just compress it. And every day I get a little bit more nervous, a little edgier, a little more. And that's why I spend money on psychoanalysis. For God's sakes, doctor, find an answer to all feel comfortable. And I can find a lot of reasons why the spring is there, but it doesn't help. Yes, I know why. The only thing I've ever thought about this later, I didn't use it. The only possible reason of knowing why you have these screw-ups is you might be late at night in a bar sometime, and some big moose come over and says, "Hey, you! What the hell's wrong with you?" And then you can tell them. Well, I wasn't really nurtured as a child, and I've had a lot. Oh, shut up, And I read books. I read philosophy books. Some I understood and some I didn't. That's one thing. One of the great things about being an imitation intellectual. You like to read German philosophers. It gives you a little panache. And if you're by yourself, you can say, huh? But if people are watching, you say, how true. One of the things I liked about German philosophers is a guy named Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, because I was raised in a very strict church, and if you break 2 or 3 of our commandments, you're about done. And when I got sober, I was telling someone, I've broken all 10 commandments. There's not much chance for me to return to God. It wasn't until years later I realized I hadn't broken all 10 commandments. I've never coveted my neighbor's manservant. Where I live, I should say yet. But to return, when I went to this God talk made me crazy. I try to sometimes explain. I don't want to hear about God. I remember a woman in Chicago at a meeting one time came up to me. She said, "Oh, son," she said, "we just hate to see you fight God." I remember thinking, it's all I could do to keep from saying, "Well, ma'am, you'll never see me fight God again." Now you'll just hear me fight God for a while. And I can't return to God. I can't do these things. I can't find anything. What I was just starting to say about Nietzsche. One of his works, one of his protagonists says, God is dead. Why do you concern yourself with God? Perhaps he once existed to set the orbs of the world, but now it's all anarchy except for the natural law. I remember reading, boy, that's good news. I hope that's true. And I read a little bit more about him. I really identified with him until I found out he died in the insane asylum. But he didn't die because he was crazy. He just had terminal syphilis. You know, he was a good time guy, that's all. But there's a very famous plaque in Chicago at a theological seminary. It's just hideous. It says, God is dead. Signed Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, 1884. And beneath it, unfortunately, it says, Nietzsche's dead. Signed God, 1906. Yeah, well. But I knew I was not an alcoholic because when I am sober, I have feelings of inadequacy that no one seems to have. I have feelings of fear. I have feelings that I must keep up a wall. I can't sustain one-to-one relationships. I used to wonder about that. Why was it I could never sustain one-to-one relationships? And after I listened to a couple inventories, after I was sober a while, I finally discovered, because I suppose it must be a semi-common thing. But when you have no self-worth or any self-approval to speak of way down deep, you can pretend you do and you can be hip and slick and cool. But down deep, having a lack of self-approval, you must get your approval from others. And for me to sustain a one-to-one relationship, I have to expect of them without being aware of it. All you have to do is treat me special all the time. And then I'll feel average. But if you treat me average, I feel rejected. And no one's going to treat you special all the time. They finally accept you. Hi, how are you? So I never could sustain anything. And all these feelings just about ate me up. And I discovered when I was 15 and thereafter, a few drinks changes things. That's why I drink. And no matter where I am in Texas, where I was living in Texas, or whether living in Illinois or Chicago or anywhere I was working, California, when it gets bad enough, I take a few drinks. And I don't drink because I'm a drinker. I drink because I'm a feeler. It's almost as though, I hear AAs say this all the time, all my life. Oh, you just got the same feelings everybody else has got, kid. And I think that's probably true. But unlike you, I don't have any protective shield somehow. It's almost as though I didn't get my protective shield. And I feel things terribly intensely, much more than you, and I can tell by looking at you. Because you wind up comparing my inside against your outside. I'm comparing my raw meat against your defense mechanism. That tells me I am way different than you. And little by little I drink, and then I drink too much. Then someone says, oh, you ought to go to AA. They stop a drink, that'll help you. And you have to say, gee, thanks for the advice. But inside of you, a voice just wants to shriek, but you don't understand. You don't understand. Doesn't anybody understand? and go to AA and have them read those steps about returning to God and making amends to people. Where's the step where somebody makes an amend to me, for God's sakes? Where's the step where I'm sick of, here's $10 for calling the police on me that time, hope it wasn't inconvenient. You know, that's the kind of therapy I need. Write down things you would never tell a living soul and then read them to some blabbermouth at a meeting. Hey, did you know I used to be married to a sheep outside of Butte, Montana? Before this goes out of this room, that is just an example. That's not my inventory. I never went to Butte, Montana. But I stood in that street corner, and I would have bet my life that there was nothing to do, because there's nothing. What more could I do? It's all gone. Just like, I feel like Scarlett O'Hara. It's gone with the wind. Should have seen me before the war, baby. But it's gone with the wind. And it was raining, so I walked to an AA club that I'd been asked to leave a few days before for being drunk. I didn't know anybody in this town. I walked 72 blocks in the rain out there, sick and desperate. A woman asked me one time, how could you possibly walk all that distance when you're sick and desperate? That's the only time you can. You can't do it any other time. And I went back to this stinking club, and they weren't glad to see me, and I wasn't glad to see them. Not only was it an AA club, but it was the worst type of AA club. It was full of AA fanatics. I know of nothing more distressing to an intelligent, non-alcoholic slipper having a run of bad luck than to be surrounded by AA fanatics. Keep coming back. Live and let live. First things first. Work the step. Oh. And I hung around there. I wound up sleeping in an abandoned car in their parking lot, and I went to meetings and ate. I revived myself by eating about 4 pounds of cake at every meeting. One puke after about a week said, I see if here's an apple, kid. I said, thank you for the apple, you dirty bastard. And on and on. What are you doing? Are you signing? She's signing to the... Is there someone in there? This is a hard place to work. My time up already. Well, Jimmy, you really took a lot of time tonight. That's why it's kind of amazing to come in here tonight, to stand up and say a funny thing happened to me on my way to my grave. On my way back to the insane asylum, on the way to desperation, one day somehow I stayed sober. And now it's been something over 40 years since that day I walked off Skid Row. And the odd thing about it is, the only therapy I've had all this time is Alcoholics Anonymous, something I already knew all about the day I got sober. I don't think I've learned anything significant about AA since I got sober, which kind of makes people think, well, what was different this time? And that is, why would anybody who slipped as long as I did, who now been sober as long as I have, what was different this time? I would like to know, not only for myself, but so I could transmit it to others, because they still refer long-term slippers to me, and as though I got some magic answer for it, but I haven't. And I look back, a couple of years ago I was talking in Toronto at an afternoon meeting. There was a question, they had the question and answer meeting, so the big know-it-all from Los Angeles could answer questions. And I have a facility of doing that, I think someone told me later, because I have the ability to weave a tapestry of BS while I think of the answer. And a woman in the back gets up and she says, Clancy, I don't want one of your long answers. What was different this time? I couldn't think of an answer. In a sentence or two, I could not think of an answer. And I felt, well, that's about all the time we have. We'll talk to you later about it. And I was taking a shower that night before the regular meeting, and it suddenly came to me. And it was an answer I didn't like. I don't like this answer. It's a 2-bit little nickel and dime answer. Not even 2-bit, nickel and dime answer. I like answers. I like emotion. I like to inculcate emotions that are big and have panache. And I'd like to have the new guy tonight leave here and say, did you hear what Clancy said? Wet birds don't fly at night. I'd like to have him say, "Did you hear what Clancy said? Never mind if the horse is blind. Keep loading the wagon." These mean nothing, but they give newcomers hope, And the answer I wound up with, that I'm stuck with, is something I'd like to transmit to those who may be new or having difficulty. It's a very unhappy answer. This is the first time that my emotional standards sunk so low that I began to take actions I didn't believe in and I thought were stupid. That doesn't sound like much of an answer, does it, after all those years? And then I look back and that's although I didn't realize it, the direct... we'd like to think we could come to AA and make changes like this. I'm here, that's going to be all different. Boom! But it really isn't. What makes it so discouraging is that you're more like a ship or an airplane. You come here, and you change, you keep going, will you? Jesus, it's about time. It's a slow process, and that's why we can't trust ourselves. And I'm glad that I fell into the hands of a sponsor who was unwilling to give me unconditional love. He insisted I take actions. And I look back and I think, why did I take that crap? That guy gave me crap. And I would never take crap. I've always been defiant. I've quit jobs when people imply I don't have it all together. I get in fights in bars. I do a lot of things that I'm not equipped to do. I'm defiant, though. I'm proud of that. And this guy had given me crap. Why would I take anything from him? I look back at, again, listening to inventories and looking at my own life, I realized why I was defiant for so many years. Because down deep inside of me, I've always known and have been ashamed of the fact that I'm weak. I hate being weak. I started off as a sports writer. I was around men. I've been men all my life. I don't want anybody to know that I'm weak. Down inside of me, there's a streak of weakness that I can't stand. And so when people try to come on to me, I can't let them think they can. Shut up! I quit. Take your job and shove it. The job I worked a year to get, and tell them to shove it, because it seems to me they're trying to demean me and intimate I'm weak. And get in fights in bars, and on and on. And here's this guy giving me a bunch of crap. I should tell him, don't stick in your ear! Do you know, in those days, then, and a little bit now, but you know who I like? I like people who like me. I think they're stupid. They have no sense. I don't respect them, but I like them. I hate people who can see through me. I hate them because they can see that I'm weak and that I'm phony and I'm just always trying to be something I'm not. I hate him. I hated this guy because he could see through me. But he also liked me. So I liked him a little. And he would get me to do things, and he'd give me a pat on the back. I tell you, I did things to get approval from that old boob I wouldn't have done for my mother or father or for my employer or for baby Jesus. Just, you did a good job, kid. And little by little, I took actions that I thought were stupid. And I went to meetings. I had no great zeal. An example I use sometimes, I remember standing outside that club, still sitting in an abandoned car, 6-7 weeks sober, standing in front of the club, night, 7 o'clock. I think to myself, I'm not going to another meeting. I can't stand it anymore. That I'm successful. You're a bum. I just can't. Sick of being people looking down on me. Well, I got to hold up a gas station, get some money, get some front teeth, get back to someplace in New York, Chicago, and get back in advertising where I can do good. Not take this God crap forever. I'm not going to do it anymore. Then the voice would say, "Come on, Clancy, get in the car, ready to go to the meeting." I'm sick of being treated like an animal. "Come on, Clancy, you're going to help Fred move his furniture." Oh, shit. Over a period of time, he manipulated me, my pain, and saved my life. I've had the opportunity, some of you have, to fly in the SST to Paris from here. But even coming in here, when you're on the SST, you're going twice the speed of sound. When you land in Paris, you hope we get good brakes on this baby. We're going to... The gentleman from Holland. Holland last year, or a couple of years ago, I spoke at his convention. That's where I met him. He really is from Holland. And I have one thing to say to you. I would be grateful, wouldn't you? I just made that up. That wooden shoe, see, they done where? Well, getting back to the insane asylum. But they don't use brakes on airplanes. When they land, they reverse the thrust of the jets. The same jets that push you this way are now stopping you. Of course, we all know that. And in much the same manner, I've come to understand that's what it is with pain in Alcoholics Anonymous. The same pain that makes it imperative for people like me to drink. If I can allow someone to change the thrust of that pain, that same pain can be used to get me to take actions I wouldn't take on my own volition for anything. I've made amends to people. I've done things. I've gone back and said I was sorry to my father, a man I hated, wanted to kill. All sorts of dumb little things he made me do. Took that pain. The day I was going to commit suicide, now 6 months over, I just lost the job as a dishwasher because I couldn't get along with the busboys. Well, very funny. And I decided to kill myself. I was going to walk in the ocean and do a Star is Born. I never lost my sense of drama. Then they'd all be sorry. And my sponsor took that. I called him up to say goodbye. And he used that pain to get me to write an inventory. I just told him a week before, I've taken my inventory with a psychiatrist. Why do I want to take it with the out-of-work actor? What good's that going to do me? And that always made him testy. I said, my judgment, Bob, that's the last thing in the world. I'm so full of remorse and regret. My life is over, Bob. In my judgment, I need something much more deep and understanding. And he explained that to me. He said, in your judgment? Who cares about your judgment? You live in an abandoned car, for Christ's sake. If I wanted your judgment, I'd put my head in the back window and ask you for it. You're a loser. I was so upset I came out of that phone booth. I'm glad I turned left. I'd have been in the ocean in 2 steps. I got to the car. I said, give me some paper. I'll be right back. I wrote things I wouldn't tell. I swore I'd never even think about it again. Just dirty, petty, nasty. And I got somebody said to me, why don't you tell your psychiatrist these things? Because when you're paying that kind of dough, you can't risk rejection. That's why. You did what, sir? Get out of my office. But first, wash off that chair. And later, he took me along the ocean a week later, and he gave me a flashlight, and I read it to him. And I thought, oh, God. And I swore he'd make me walk back from Oxnard, but he didn't. He leaned over and says, is that all there is to it? I said, yeah. He said, congratulations. The best job you've done since you've been sober, kid. I thought it was, Bob. I've taken that same trip over 200 times since then, along the ocean with some other boob over there with a flashlight. Some of the people in this room have been on that trip. Let me explain this part before I read it. It's an amazing thing. All good inventories are exactly the same. It's an amazing, and people die rather than take an inventory. They never know they're all the same. They all contain lack of self-worth, guilt, fear, and occasional lashing out at the world to punish them for how I've been treated. The specifics vary all over the lot. 1 week, a few years ago, I had inventory from the daughter of the most famous man in the 20th century and a guy just out of the Washington State Penitentiary. And they're same inventory, entirely different specifics. Lack of self-worth, guilt, fear, lashing out. That's what makes AA work, because it works at a level that your mind and my conscious mind cannot see when we come here desperate and afraid. That's why we need someone to be able allow them to superimpose actions over our perceptions. Because just as alcohol had the power, unnatural power in my body to alter my perception of reality, Alcoholics Anonymous is designed to do what alcohol does, only much more slowly and over a long period of time. And it's so easy to become discouraged here and say it isn't working when it is working. When people around you can see you're doing it again, I can't see it because I'm caught up in a momentary depression or self-loathing of some sort. And little by little I took these steps, and little by little I stayed there. And eventually I didn't drink anymore. And I finally held a job when I was 2 years old. I finally got a job as a little writer in a medical corporation. I still didn't have any front teeth. I said to my sponsor, Bob, I've got some money hidden away. I'm going to get some front teeth, and I'm going to really crack them. He said, you got money hidden away? How about your kids in Dallas? I said, well, they got front teeth. So they got that money to send it to them. So I went to work that corporation holding my lip like this. They didn't know I didn't have front teeth. They thought it had been burned in a fire. But I went to work every day. I'll tell you something else. On that job, from that sponsor, I learned some of the great spiritual lessons I've ever learned. And if you're kind of new or wondering what the great spiritual lessons are of AA, you say, of course I know them, prayer and meditation. Yeah, they are. But let me give you some more practical ones. Do what you said you were going to do. Be where you said you were going to be when you said you would be there, or let them know you're not going to be there. Don't take out your hostility on people who can't answer back. Employees, children, waiters and waitresses, where you can be a big deal at their expense. On days when you know you're having a bad day, watch that mouth, because you can cut people to ribbons and just not even being aware of it and wonder what's all happened. And little by little I held that job. And I got some front teeth. I got to be director of advertising of that corporation. I was 7 years sober. Another guy and I were brought into Hollywood, and we created something called Boss Radio. Became the #1 hard rock station of the world. Someone just told me the other day, there's a thing on the internet with my picture when I was slender. When I was 10 years sober, I was downtown doing public relations with oil companies. 15 years sober, I was a marketing director in Beverly Hills. When I was 5 years sober, the same family moved out of Dallas to my side. And I was 15 years sober. For a lark, I took a job for a few months. I've been on it now for over 25 years, which is running the mission on Skid Row that threw me out in 1958. And people say, why would you give up this great career with that stinking mission? I never have been able to think of a good answer. Well, such a significant decrease in salary, I thought it must be spiritual. Wrong. But I owe it to Alcoholics Anonymous and taking the actions of AA. We hear a lot of people, we study the book by the week and look at it, and we should go through the book, but people take sentences and study, what does it really mean? I've come to the conclusion AA means what it says it means. And in my opinion, one of the great all-time definitions of Alcoholics Anonymous, in 1950, one of our co-founders, when they put on the first convention, one of our co-founders was dying of cancer. And they thought, well, we better not speak, Dr. Bob. He says, yeah, I want to speak. I'm the second oldest person in the world. And he got up there and he spoke. He had to be helped to the podium. He died of cancer. And he was trying so desperately to convey to the people what he had found that saved his life. And he greeted them, said, I'm glad to have you here, and I hope you'll like our town. I hope you'll go back and tell the boys and girls back in your town what we have found. He said, but there are 2 or 3 things I would indeed feel remiss if I did not tell you. First of all, keep the program simple. Let's not louse it all up with Freudian complexes which may be of interest to the scientists but have nothing to do with our work here. When reduced to the last, our work here consists of love and service. And we all know what love is, and we all know what service is. Let's not forget that. Secondly, he said, let us guard that erring member, the tongue, and try to use it with kindness and understanding and love. And there isn't a person in this room, me or you, who doesn't know exactly what he was talking about. Being tired and cross and lashing out, criticizing, attacking other groups, do this, that, that. And lastly, he said, let us never be too busy to stop and give the man behind us a hand. He said, because none of us would be here if someone hadn't taken us to a few meetings, given us a pat on the back, showed us a little bit about the path. Let us never reach that stage of smug indifference where we're too busy to do that. And sometimes what you see in AA, people get so caught up in the paraphernalia of AA, they forget that our #1 process is to carry the message to the man who is still sick. I'm on my way to a spiritual meeting. Get that newcomer son of a bitch out of here. Yeah, that's an exaggeration, but I heard the guy say that once. Because we are here, not because we're wonderful or good, but because we are here because we are lost. Lost in the stars. That song always reminded me of Lost in the Stars. I've always wanted to be comfortable. I don't know anybody who hasn't wanted to be comfortable. And I was so glad to discover there's a name for this problem. It is not an alcohol problem. It is called alcoholism. And the difference between alcohol and alcoholism is this. Alcohol problems are overcome by getting sober and cleaning up your act. In alcoholism, getting sober and cleaning up your act just eventually makes it more painful. That's why you must return to drinking. And that's why you have to stop and get sober. But then you have to return to drinking. Then you have to stop and get sober. You go to AA, you can go to psychiatry, wherever you want, but you're going to drink. And it turns out, if you could remember this, that AA is not designed to get you sober. Toilets get you sober. Detoxes get you sober. It is after you're sober and in AA and the pain comes, then you must try AA, which are actions and involvements which many times seem strange and foreign to your judgments. Therefore, you better find someone to whom you respect enough to allow them to superimpose actions over your perspectives. Because if you don't, you'll just be another one of the wanderers. Now, today in America, there's more sobriety than any place in the history of the world. And yet, in America, it is estimated about 95% of alcoholics still die drunk, or as a direct result of drinking. I'm sure they all say the same thing. But I'm not really an alcoholic, you see. I went to AA and places like that, but my problem is not really alcohol. My problems come when I'm sober. It just gets so bad. I just drink to get some relief and got a little out of hand. They don't realize they've just defined the disease of alcoholism. So we gather together to share our experience, strength, and hope. We found meetings like this and other meetings so people can come and share their experience, strength, and hope with one another. Come to realize that they are not so different after all, that the world is full of people like us, and there's a way to live with some degree of dignity. The last thing I want to say, I ought to sit down, because it's an analogy that I have been thinking about recently. Some of you heard me say it, but I don't care. In the early 1700s, the most lethal epidemic in the world was smallpox. Cholera came and went, and Black Plague came in the 14th century, but smallpox was really terrible. And nobody had any idea about bacteria or germs or anything. What's causing this? Is it the moon? Are we under God's curse? What is it? I have a book at home called Bring Out Your Dead that describes one of these smallpox epidemics in Philadelphia, where they just wind up running a wagon through the streets saying, bring out your dead, and you bring out your mother and your babies and throw them on the truck. That's all you can do. Don't know why. And this happened again and again. In England in the 1700s, there was a doctor named Edward Jenner. And he noticed, it seemed to him that girls who worked milking cows didn't get smallpox. And that there could be no possible connection. So he talked to the girls. And sure enough, some of them did have smallpox and die. But the ones who had had something called cowpox, which was a mild inflammation they got, they did not get smallpox. He could not understand why this could be. There was no reason to think so, some superstition. But he had to give it a try. He had an empirical observation. So he bought a little boy named Jimmy Phipps, 9 years old. And he took Jimmy Phipps to where the girls had cowpox, put a slash in his arm, had no idea how to transmit it. He thought this would be as good as any. Cut a slit in his arm, took some pus from a girl with cowpox, and rubbed it in his arm. And Jimmy Phipps got cowpox and got sick. Got better. Then he took him to where they were dying of smallpox in the pest house. And he cut him with the arm. He didn't use his hand this time. He smeared in a bunch of bloody pus from somebody dying of smallpox. And Jimmy Phipps got sick and got better. And for the first time ever, they found a solution to the problem of smallpox. So they couldn't imagine how this could be. Just a series of coincidences. But they began, he notified this, and some people began allowing themselves to get cowpox. But a lot of people didn't, because it didn't make sense. And here's an interesting little thought for you. In Latin, the word for cow is vacus. That's where the term vaccination comes from, injection of the cow. And 150 years later, they found why this is. They discovered bacteria, germs, had microscopes. They discovered that this cowpox, in some strange way, set up antibodies in the blood which held off smallpox. And they now knew why. But a lot of people had died in that 150 years because they couldn't believe it could be. I've always had the feeling someday, perhaps, maybe 100 years from now, some scientist in his laboratory will say, I think I've found definitive proof. A series of apparently non-applicable actions taken under the direction of a dictatorial guidance, forcing these people to sit in rooms hour after hour and listen to the same dreary facts, somehow sets up a flood of endorphins to the hypothalamus, making it unnecessary to drink alcohol again. I've got it. Then we'll all be happy. Except all of us will be dead a long time ago. So those of you who are new tonight, I suppose the thrust of my talk, and the thrust of this celebration, and the thrust of whatever you find today, and the thrust of our World Service Office, is to try to convince you. Never mind how it looks to you. Take the cowpox here. Take the cowpox here. Take the cowpox here. And you'll be glad you did. Thank you.